do you get your kids to tell you everything, including the stuff that's really, really hard? Like, hey, I got an F on the test, or I was dishonest over here, or I did this wrong thing over there. You're not a dictator. You're not a lecturer. You are helping a human being solve their problem. And because of that, you become one of the most interesting people in the world for them to talk to, which as a dad, man, I can't think of anything better. When your kid has the courage to tell you something that you know is difficult for them and they know it's difficult, we need to actually... So how do you become the safe parent to talk to? How do you get your kids to tell you everything, including the stuff that's really, really hard? Like, hey, I got an F on the test, or I was dishonest over here, or I did this wrong thing over there. Kids will tend to avoid all of that if they don't feel safe, right? They don't want to be hit with blame, shame, pain, guilt, all of these things, right? So they'll avoid parents at all costs if there's something bad that they have to share with us, right? A lot of it also has to do with our reactions. How do we react when we find out there's some wrongdoing, right? And I'm not saying that, our reaction is the absence of discipline and consequences. It's actually, quite frankly, the opposite of that. There's a two-part approach to this. One is the marathon and one is the sprint. The marathon are the things that we do on a daily basis as moms and as dads and as parents that actually provide an environment where a kid feels pretty safe to share what's going on for them. Now, listen, I am not condoning bad behavior. I am not saying like, hey, you just shoplifted and oh, great, you told your dad. So, hey, you're off scot-free. No worries. Thanks for telling me. That's awesome. No, I'm not saying that at all. There are consequences to every action, and there are natural consequences to every action. For this particular video, what I'm going to be going over is more the marathon approach and the sprint approach, and you're going to need both. The marathon is what we do on a daily basis. If you've been following me for any amount of time, you probably know that I love to ask my kids 3 questions every single day. One question is, what was the best part of your day today? I'll vary that question up several different ways, but basically what I'm trying to do is get a high point of their day and a story. It could be like, what was the funniest thing that happened to you today? Or what's something you're proud of today? Or what's something that made you smile today? Basically what I'm trying to do is help them explore what was meaningful for them that day, right? That gets the conversation going off in a really great direction. The next question is something that I love to do because it creates an environment of psychological safety. It's good for me to practice and it's great for my kids. So I'll ask them, what's something you failed at today? And what'd you learn from it? What's something that challenged you today? And what'd you learn from it? What was something that was insanely hard for you? And how did you get through it? What I'm basically asking for there is I want my kids to tell me about something that was tough for them or a low point or something they're not so proud of. And there's a variety of different answers that come out of that every single day. Sometimes I'll get like, oh man, like Dad, I got a D on that science test. So they'll share that, or they'll be like, hey, I did my presentation in front of the class and it totally bombed. Or I got caught misbehaving in class today and, I got sent to the principal's office, whatever those things are, right? So in that moment, I have an opportunity as a dad to either send a message to my kid of like, hey, I'm the guy to talk to about this stuff, or I'm the guy to avoid at all costs when it comes to this stuff. If I'm the guy that you want to avoid, well, if you come and tell me that you got a D on the science test, I'm going to blast you. I'm going to yell at you. And by the way, if you're watching this video and you're an adult, chances are you might have been raised in that environment where you were blasted with shame, guilt, all these different things, sometimes even emotional abuse, sometimes even physical abuse, depending on what happened, right? My kid tells me like, I got a D on the science test. There's that part of me as a dad that's just been like, dude, I knew you weren't studying. Like I told you to study. We knew this test was coming up. I saw you on your phone. Like, what were you thinking? Like all these different things. Basically, even if I'm right, and I knew my kid didn't study for it or get prepared for it, I'm sending him the message that, you know what? I am probably not the guy that you need to bring bad news to. In fact, I'm probably the last guy you want to bring bad news to. And we think we're being effective as parents by blasting our kids and teaching them a lesson. Maybe to some degree, yeah, and there's a time and a place for that. But when your kid has the courage to tell you something that you know is difficult for them and they know it's difficult, we need to actually, I believe it or not, I know it sounds crazy, praise them for their courage. And that's step number 1. When you're going at this approach and it's a marathon, not a sprint, you're doing these things on a daily basis. And if your kid tells you something that's hard for them to share with you, whether they got a D on the science test or they got in trouble or whatever, the first thing that you want to do is at least praise them for the courage of telling you. You're not praising them for the behavior. You're not praising them for the action, but you are praising them for the courage to tell you. And my response to that would be like, oh man, dude, I bet that took a lot of courage to tell me, man. Thank you for telling me that. That took a lot of courage. And my kid will lighten up a little bit. You take the pressure off them a little bit. Then what I do, I'm so tempted to lecture in that moment, be like, you know what, you should have done this and you should have done that. And I saw you do this. And it's still, even if I do it with a tone of love, it's still a lecture. So instead, if you know anything about human psychology, people don't respond well to lectures. In fact, after a few seconds, they pretty much tune you out and they're just asking themselves, when is this over so I can walk away and do something else? Instead, when I want to lecture, I'll get really, really curious and I'll ask questions. So it'll look like this, be like, dude, man, that took a lot of courage for you to tell me that. Thanks for telling me that. Well, let me ask you this. You got a D on the science test. If you were able to do this situation completely over again and you were able to get prepared all over again, is there anything you would have done different? And that's where I'll get the kid to be like, to really explore. And I'll usually get more honesty on top of it. And they'll be like, you know what? I could have studied a lot harder. I didn't think the test was going to be as hard as it was. I put in probably maybe half the effort that I would have. Or they might be like, you know what, Dad, I didn't study at all. And then I'll just challenge them on that. I'll be like, okay, I was like, so we know we didn't get prepared. So how might you have been more prepared? What would you have done differently? Right. And they'll be like, you know what? I probably would have studied on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and then maybe even did a study group on Thursday. Or I might even have asked you, hey, would you mind quizzing me or something like that? I might even have gotten up early on the day of the test just to review my notes, just to get better prepared. Now, what am I doing there? I'm asking a question. The kid is basically lecturing themselves on what they should have done different. And guess what? They're going to buy into that more because they're the ones that are saying it. So this is what I followed up with. I'm like, man, that sounds like a pretty solid strategy to me. It sounds like you might have learned a few things. So what did you learn from this? And then they'll reiterate what they learned. You know what? I should have been more prepared. I probably would have prepared twice as hard. I might have gotten up early the day of, and I just would have reviewed a few things, or I might have done a study group. Well, great. Well, based on what you've told me, when is your next test? And they'll tell me, they'll be like, well, I've actually got one next Friday. Well, great. Well, what's the subject in? It's in history. Okay. Well, based on what we know about this, what would you do different to get ready for that test versus this past one? And then you'll see it start to click, right? They'll be like, you know what? I'm going to study on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday this week. I'm actually going to get up early on Friday, the day of the test. I'm going to review my notes. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to call a few of my friends who are in the class, and we're going to do a study group on Thursday night to just make sure we're totally prepared. And I'd be like, dude, that sounds like a great idea. I think you got this thing locked up. What do you say? Yeah, man, I got it. Okay, so what did I just do? I created an environment of psychological safety where my kid got to tell me something really, really hard. And instead of becoming his lecturer, right, or someone who's just going to beat him down with guilt, I became a resource and a guide for him to problem solve his own problem and for him to articulate how he is going to go about solving that problem. Not me telling him what he should do, him sharing with me what he's going to do. And if we know anything about human psychology, people that state an idea of what they have, they are way more likely to do it than if we tell them to do something. So that's the marathon. The marathon is the daily. Ask your kid, what is the most challenging thing you went through today? What is something you failed at today? Get them really used to talking about failure, because we can't have success without failure. Ask anybody who's successful. Even Michael Jordan, he is the greatest basketball player of all times. And I think when he was given the game-winning shot out of 900 plus shots to win the game, he only landed, I think, 136 of those things. I could be totally wrong, but all I do know is he failed a lot more than he succeeded. But he's still known as one of the greatest basketball players of all times. And if you look at even all the shots that he ever scored in his entire career, he missed way more than what he got, but he's still the greatest basketball player of all time. So that's the marathon, is getting your kids to talk about this stuff on a daily basis. Now, the sprint is when you don't ask for it and they just come and they tell you, or it just comes up in conversation. So I'll share with you one story to really hit this home. Another way to vet these things out is get your kid out on a one-on-one date, or get them in an environment where they feel comfortable talking to you. And by the way, if you're doing the marathon approach, which is a daily approach to get them talking about things that are tough for them to talk about, over time, they are going to become insanely comfortable talking to you because you have become the go-to in their life when things have gotten bad. Now, the story I want to share with you was a few years ago, and it was my 18-year-old, my oldest son. We went out on a one-on-one date. This was about 2 years ago, and we went to a movie. We saw the the season finale of The Chosen season 3. And then we went out to dinner, and I asked him over dinner, I said, hey, I don't have any agenda here whatsoever. I want to ask you a question, but I have no agenda and I have no idea what you're going to tell me. But is there anything you want to share with me that's tough for you to share, or something you've been holding back that you think I might not understand? And I saw it right away. He was like, just kind of took that deep breath, like I just knew. I was like, oh boy, something's coming. Now that's a cue for me, right, as a dad, because I could easily be triggered by whatever he's going to tell me. And I have the ability and the capability, it's been proven thousands of times, that I can lose my cool, right? Even though I have a skill set to keep me responsive and not reactionary. So when I saw him do this, I was like, oh man, I feel like something big is coming. And then he's like, Dad, I don't know how to tell you this, but I have 7 missing assignments and I have 2 Fs in classes right now. And I was fumed. I was absolutely angry, but I hid it. I hid it because I knew that this kid was basically taking a courageous moment and telling me something he didn't have to tell me. He knew I'd probably find out eventually, but he was voluntarily telling me. So in my mind, I was like, dude, we don't have missing assignments in our family. Like, we don't have Fs. Like, we have a standard, and an expectation around how we go about school. We finish all of our assignments. We work hard, and grades, happen because of hard work and because we do the things we're supposed to do. So if you're not doing things, if you've got 7 missing assignments, you were in serious trouble. That was what was on my mind. Now, how did I handle it? I literally just did exactly what I told you. I was like, oh man, dude, that took you a lot of courage to tell me that. Number one, thanks for telling me that. That's a lot. So I'm curious now, how did we get to 7 missing assignments? And notice my tone. How did we get to 7 missing assignments? I'm not being like, you better tell me why you have 7 missing assignments. I said, tell me how we got to 7 missing assignments. And he had a very legitimate reason for it. He had COVID at the time. This was a couple of years ago. He was out of school for 5 days. And he fell behind, and he's like, and I said, he goes, Dad, he goes, listen, I've really been working hard. Like, I'm trying to catch up after being away from school for 5 days. Like, I've been working for weeks. Every time I finish one assignment, I get 2 more. Every time I finish those, I get 3 more. Every time I finish those, I get another one. He's like, I literally cannot get ahead. And I could tell that this kid was like legitimately stressed out, and he really didn't know what to do. His fight or flight, that amygdala, was going off so much that he actually couldn't even think logically, like, how do I get out of this? So what did I do? I praised him for his courage, and then got really curious with questions. I said, dude, thanks for telling me that, man. That took a lot of courage for you to tell me that. I know when I was your age, the last thing in the world I wanted to do was tell my mom about something bad in school, because I would get crushed for it, right? I was like, so let me ask you this, Ethan. We're in a situation, you've got several missing assignments, but the story I'm telling myself is last semester, you had the flu pretty bad and you were out for 4 days. You were behind on missing assignments. I think you had 1 or 2 Fs in classes because of those missing assignments, but yet you were able to overcome it. What did you do? What I'm doing within that question is I'm guiding him through, hey, let's go look for evidence in the past where you've been successful in this exact same situation. And he thought about it. He's like, yeah, I did. He goes, what I did is I got up early before school. I didn't eat lunch with my friends. I went in the auditorium all by myself. And I did that for 2 days. And I just cranked out all my assignments, but I just kind of needed that quiet. I needed that space. And I just looked at him and I smiled, and he smiled back. And we both knew that in that moment, he had solved his own problem. And I said, Ethan, it sounds like to me, you've got the recipe for success right there at your fingertips. So what are you going to do about this? And he just like brightened up, and he's like, I'm going to get up early tomorrow. I'm going to work on my assignments. I'm going to go to the auditorium, and I'm going to crank out as much as I can in my 1 hour that I have. And I'm going to do that all week until I get done. 2 days later, he came home and he did this. And he had his arms stretched out, big smile on his face. And he's like, guess what? And I was like, I think I know what you're going to tell me, but what do you got? And he's like, I finished everything. My 2 Fs are now a C. I feel on top of the world. I was like, and what did you do? He's like, I got up early and I went to the auditorium and I did these things and I was successful. And I was like, congratulations, man. Congratulations. You had a problem. You overcame it. And then he thanked me. And I'm like, I didn't do anything, man. All we did was talk, right? But he thanked me for it. I think he thanked me for it because he needed a guide in that moment. And by the way, was there consequences? Absolutely. I didn't even have to inflict my own consequences. He had his own. He lost out on sleep. He had to get up early. He had to eat lunch without his friends, alone in the auditorium while he was doing his work. And he had to do that for 2 days in a row. Now, is that a severe consequence? I don't really know. Have I seen him fall back into that trap ever since? No, he's kept up just fine. So did that teach him a lesson? Yes. Did I become the go-to for him to talk to? Yes. And guess what? So can you. So ask your kids daily, what did they fail at? What is most challenging for them? Respond with some praise, that they have courage to tell you those things. Get really curious and ask them questions like, what would you do differently in this situation if it ever came up again? And get them to articulate a plan and the lessons that they've learned. Suddenly, you're not a dictator. You're not a lecturer. You are helping a human being solve their problem. And because of that, you become one of the most interesting people in the world for them to talk to, which as a dad, man, I can't think of anything better.